All right, this is very exciting. First off, I saw these posters that they gave you. I feel like I'm going to be shooting free throws in front of a bunch of angry college kids. But can you guys lift those up for the purposes of a picture? That's pretty great. Yeah, there we go. We got to get that going. All right, there we go. Beautiful. All right, free speech. We're going to talk about some free speech stuff here today. Before we begin, though, the university did give me a list of topics that we're allowed to talk about, so I just want to... There we go, that was a joke. Okay.
Blank.
It's blank, that's the thing. Nothing written there. All right. Take a picture of it. Okay. All right, we're going to talk about free speech. We will laugh a little. I know it feels like you can't laugh, that you're doing something edgy just by coming to listen to three very moderate guys talk about free speech. And the state of free speech, which is actually in jeopardy, which is why I think the three of us do a lot of what we do. So I'll kick it to you guys to start. Michael, you first. What do you think is the general state of free speech in America in 2017 right now?
Well, it's still legal, so we're okay there. The state hasn't come down on us. And it's good to remember that when we're talking about free speech in terms of the First Amendment, that this is just that the government cannot inhibit your free speech, and it says nothing about a private organization. So, for example, Skeptic Magazine, we have some advertising, and like when we did an issue back in the 90s on Holocaust revisionism, David Irving and all these guys were in the news, so I did a thoughtful long piece, and I interviewed all of the players, and they wanted to place an ad in Skeptic, and I thought, an advertisement has something of a cachet, like we endorse it to a certain extent. Because we're a small niche magazine, not a general publication as a GM or Rolex watches ads or something like that. So I said no. So, and one of them said, "Oh, he's infringing our free speech." No, I'm just not taking your ad. If you want to write a rebuttal to my article, we'll publish that. That's fine. And free exchange of ideas, but I'm not required to publish their ideas. In fact, they have their own magazine, so they're free to do that. And so, we're talking about two different things. The state doing something about your free speech versus private institutions may or may not. I mean, universities don't have to invite Milo. They're not required. His free speech is not restricted because he didn't get invited. But once he's invited and he's there, then that's slightly different when he's not allowed to speak. So that's where I think the shades of gray are, and that's where it's becoming problematic.
Right, and even today, I don't know how you guys feel about Ann Coulter, but you may have seen that she was invited, I think, was it by the Young Republicans?
At Berkeley,
what group it was? At Berkeley, and now they said they can't secure it, so she can't go. Again, having nothing, it doesn't matter what her ideas are, she was invited and has a right to do it. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned the Holocaust thing, because in Europe, they have laws about Holocaust denial. We have absolute free speech here for now, and it seems like we're starting to forget some of that. Do you think that's fair to say?
Oh yeah, definitely. And so I often say, if you want to know what the state of free speech is going to be in this country, if we continue on the path that we're continuing on, and I think we'll elaborate on what we mean by that, or at least what I mean by that. If you want to see the future, look to Europe. They have laws on the books that prevent you from criticizing other people on the basis of all sorts of things. The list is growing. People actually get prosecuted for this stuff. We're having arguments in a bar over gay marriage, let's say. All kinds of other things. I've read a couple books on this. It was eye-opening to me, and I, pride myself on knowing what's going on in the world on the law of free speech. And I was floored by this. So if you want to see something scary, take a look at what's going on in other countries on that. But on that, let me just address quickly the point of the point that you asked at the beginning about what the state of free speech is, and I'll pick up on something that Michael said. If you think about it from the standpoint of the law of free speech, the First Amendment, I don't actually think it's ever been better. I think it's the best it's ever been. Contrary to what you may have heard, the Roberts Court, led by John Roberts, is one of the best courts on free speech in generations. More free speech is protected today, I think, than probably ever before in this country's history, which is an amazing thing. And I give talks on this. And yet, people, I think, are turning against free speech. And the places that you see it are on college campuses And then I think oftentimes we'll get these upwellings, these incidents that happen, and you can see it in these incidents. The one that the most recent one that I'll refer to, because we all know what's going on college campuses, and we're going to talk a lot about that. The Charlie Hebdo attack. So you remember that at first it was Je suis Charlie. I'm with Charlie. And then a couple days later, all of a sudden people were wringing their hands over it and saying, well, you shouldn't criticize somebody else's religion. The Pope actually said that. Yeah, not surprisingly, I guess, right? Right. But I mean, you shouldn't criticize somebody else's religion, which is crazy. Of course you should criticize somebody else's religion. I mean, especially when they're invoking that religion as a grounds for murdering other people. Now, I didn't know anything about Charlie Hebdo before the attack. I still don't really know a whole, although I think I probably disagree with probably 90% of what they say. I mean, I'm an atheist, so, okay, making fun of religion, I don't have a problem with it, but I'm not real familiar with it. But my view of this was, look, when the moment somebody is getting murdered for their free speech, it's no longer about what they are saying. It is no longer about what they're saying. It's about whether they have the right to say anything at all. And the fact that so many people were wringing their hands over that, and I think fleeing from defending Charlie Hebdo's right to say whatever it wanted, was a really scary phenomenon. I think we've seen that repeatedly, and now we're seeing it on college campuses with the attacks on speakers. That's what really worries me. I think of it as, like, all of you guys, this is a cliche, but you are the future, right? Young people are the future. If things continue in the way that they're continuing, we could really see some erosion of free speech, because one day, people like you are going to be the judges and the lawyers and the lawmakers that are actually, whose job it is to protect this right. So if Americans give up on free speech, the First Amendment will not save us.
No pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, Sam Harris had a great line, I think, on the Charlie Hebdo thing, which was, he said, people were murdered over cartoons, end of moral analysis.
Yes.
And it was like everybody else was debating. People were writing think pieces about, well, is this sort of okay, and what can you say about people's religions and things like that. But occasionally you do have to actually just put the gauntlet down and say, no, that's not okay. But one of the reasons that I like doing this at colleges is because I suspect we have a big diversity, not only of colors and ethnicities and sexualities and all that other stuff that the left loves, but I suspect we have a diversity of thought here. For example, how many Nazis do we have here? That was a little quick. little jazz hands and she's wearing sunglasses.
Wait, I saw you talking to her earlier. Is this a plan?
That was not a plan. Yeah. You're not really a Nazi, are you? If you are,
I'm a Holocaust denier.
you're a Holocaust denier. All right, well, we'll do something.
Well, you know what? So this is the point. It's legal.
Yes.
You can deny all you want. I mean, when David Irving went to Australia, to Austria, he was arrested at the airport on his way to a venue to give a talk. He was arrested for even thinking about saying something, and spent time in jail. I even wrote a letter to the judge on his behalf, even though I thoroughly debunked him. And we can discuss this afterwards if you want, because I know all the arguments. But still, in Canada, in France, in Switzerland, Germany especially, of course, Austria, it's illegal. You could be arrested for saying, I doubt some aspect of the Holocaust story. Well, I got news for you. The Holocaust story has changed a lot since the Second World War. This is what historians do for a living. They revise things when new data comes in.
Is that the part that's scary, is that people have forgotten that you have to defend ideas not just when it's comfortable, but when it's uncomfortable to do so. I had Holocaust survivors on both sides, my dad's side and my mom's side. I grew up around knowing survivors. So I know that this happened, but I would still defend someone's right to say it, which is actually a good segue to Richard Spencer, and we brought him up a couple times. You guys probably know who he is at this point, right? He's the frog guy, and
Right.
got that weird haircut. Yeah, well, he's the alt-right leader. He's either a white nationalist or a white supremacist, whatever it is. And on election day, or on inauguration day, he was punched. And I found myself in the uncomfortable position of defending someone whose ideas I abhor, but that he's allowed to have those ideas without getting punched. Yet there's a lot of people defending violence right now.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, and what you're seeing these days is, and this is happening on college campuses primarily, and I mean, we can talk a bit more about the ideas that underlie all this. I peg postmodernism as one of the big culprits of this notion. but it's equating speech with force. It's equating speech with violence, and you hear it all the time. And I mean, we saw it with with Heather McDonald at Claremont McKenna College, when she was essentially prevented an audience. We saw it with Charles Murray at Middlebury. The idea is, first of all, they call them a litany of things that they're not: white supremacists, et cetera, racists, homophobes. It's just a long litany, most of which is false. In fact, all of which is false in both of their cases. But then they say things like, you're giving a platform to people who are advocating ideas that would cause harm against us. Now, that can be true in some circumstances. It wasn't true with these guys, and we could debate what their ideas were. But even people have the right to have ideas, even if they're evil ideas, and to express those ideas, even if people followed them, they would ultimately logically lead to all kinds of horrible things. You can think of communism leads to widespread mass murder and death. And yet, if you want to be a communist, you can be a communist. What you can't do is you can't cross the line from speech and advocacy into action that actually carries those ideas out. So think threats and incitement. So if Richard Spencer were, and he might actually be doing this, there's actually a case against him now that I just read about the other day, which we might talk about. But if Spencer were doing something like, okay, let's get a band of our white nationalists together and start going around and attacking Jews on the street, that's a whole different ballgame. As long as he's not doing that, what he's doing is advocating an idea, where the line between what is lawful and just advocacy of ideas or discussion of ideas and crime is when you start using force against other people or advocating the use of force against other people. This is what the criminal law is designed to do. We can talk about the contours of it. But so long as you're not doing that, and in I think most of these cases, that's not been the case. The idea that we equate speech with force is crazy. It really is bad news, because once we equate speech with force, there's no grounds on which we can communicate with one another anymore. And really what you get from that is mob violence. What you get from that is force. So it's a scary prospect.
Yeah. What do you guys think about the well-meaning people that, because I do think some of them are well-meaning. They see that, they see this bad guy, they see him get punched, and they say, we got to stop this now. And I think some of them are well-meaning. I would guess that a lot of you guys have friends that were excited about, and maybe some of you, and we can do it in Q&A, we're okay with the idea of punching him. How do we get to those, because it's how the young people, and this is why I always talk about, I make fun of trigger warnings in safe spaces. By the way, we have a room full of puppies in the back. We say anything that you don't like. But that's why, because if we insulate people from these ideas, then they hear any idea, and now they believe that any idea is racist or bigoted or whatever else. You pin yourself into a corner where violence is okay.
Well, it does feel like a form of violence. If you call somebody a cunt, a faggot, a nigger, it's pretty hurtful. I mean, there's a reason there's a taboo on those words now, because they were used in association with actual physical violence. And though the line drawn from the words to the actual physical blows is much longer now than it used to be, I can sort of try to sympathize with the argument of how you got there. And therefore, that's why we started putting a taboo on those words, stop using those words. We've all kind of adopted that over the decades. And so part of the thing that seems sort of ridiculous is that we've come so far morally in the last century or so that it feels like we're fighting over ever incrementally smaller levels of progress, but with the same level of moral emotions.
Yeah.
That this guy, and I'm going to hit this guy. We all have that sense of desire for revenge to right a wrong, and so I can see how they get there. The problem is who decides which words are going to lead to the violence and which configuration leads to a mob. Hitchens was fond of saying that the only example that Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes used for crying fire in a crowded theater, fire, fire, fire.
Yeah.
See, we just did it. Was actually, in fact, the example, I guess it was a group of Yiddish socialists who were against the First World War. And they were printing pamphlets in Yiddish that pretty much no Americans could read. And he was arguing that was inciting sort of a national crisis because we need to rally around the troops for the First World War. And so, in fact, even that argument doesn't hold. That you can't can't make that argument that's a form of treason against the state. So there's really nothing left, other than maybe giving out the nuclear codes as a form of free speech. We might want to object to that.
That would be a problem.
Yeah.
I think that would be a problem. Well, I'm glad you mentioned this idea of progress and that things have gotten better. We've talked about it when you've been on my show. I'm curious, just for you guys, how many of you, just raise your hand, think that we actually have progressed as a nation, that things are actually better in 2017 than say 50 years ago?
That's
All right, that's pretty good.
That's pretty
How many of you don't? The Nazi. We've got a legitimate Nazi here. And then one guy over here. Okay, so that's pretty good, because I do think that tells you something, right? That there's a Nazi. It's all right. That tells you something, because there is a feeling, I think, in the country, or at least in the media, or in our politics, that things are much worse. Now, of course, things can get better. We can always be better as a nation. But I think that is part of the free speech equation, that if you think that things have only gotten worse, you have a lot of reasons to complain about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's especially one of the reasons that we've seen the sort of explosion, speaking metaphorically, I hope I continue to speak metaphorically, but of all of these incidents after the Trump election, because the Trump election was it was a turning point. It's not, though, it's not the beginning of all of what we're talking about, the attacks on free speech in my view, but it was definitely a kind of flashpoint. And Trump represents a number of things. Among them, he's got a really dark view of this country. I mean, remember, he talks about how it's like, in his view, it's New York City, Washington, LA, and then just this vast wasteland, like the apocalypse. It's like Road Warrior, basically, and a bunch of guys running out with mohawks on motorcycles and just beating each other. And then, like, we have to, and that's nonsense. That's not what's going on. There's productivity, I mean, yes, okay, there are issues with economics.
I live in LA. Have you ever been on 405?
Motorcycle on the 405.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. But nobody attacked
He looks
me with
tame, but he's a
chainsaw.
pretty badass dude right there.
But so that's one part, and it's false. It's really false, and it's really something we have to fight against. This idea that America is on the decline. But it's also, I think, it represents, unfortunately, a kind of upsurge in what I've called tribalism, and I mean, you know, I would call so you've all heard the term multiculturalism. It's used in a benign way. I think it's a really bad idea. I think it's a set of very bad ideas. Because what it ultimately gets you to do is think of what I would think of as non-essential, immutable characteristics that are not within your choice. They don't define your character. So harken back to Martin Luther King's view that it's the content of your character and not the color of your skin that defines who you are. Multiculturalism is really the reverse of that. It's we need to look at your skin color, we need to look at your sex, your ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think that what Trump represents is the kind of middle class, white, lower class reaction to that. It's, okay, well, if that's the way we're going to define people into clans and warring factions, well, my group's not going to be on the bottom. This guy says he's going to put my group up top, so I'm all for him. That's a bad cycle to be in. We don't want tribal warfare, and so I think that Trump is really, has kind of contributed to this idea that the country is declining, and that we all have to form our groups and we have to fight each other, and it's a really dangerous point of view.
I think he's
really
probably tapping into something that was already. I think the alt-right was there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. I think that's
And,
something we discovered when Trump was elected. That was, unpleasant news.
I mean, part of it comes from, back in the 60s when we first started surveying people on what your race is, the government, for demographic reasons, just for statistical reasons, so we know what the issues are, affirmative action and so on. You got to have data. So then everyone has to start ticking the box. And that really, I can see why they did it, but why are we still doing it? Because it then forces you, well, I don't want to be this cat, I don't want to be in this box. Yeah. Well, you got to be in a box. Or you tick the box for none.
Right.
So when one of the many strands I think that leading to Trump and the alt-right is the sort of white identity people who have largely given up that fight have been sort of forced. Well, there's all these other identity groups. Everyone's playing identity politics. Yeah. Well, the hell with it then. Okay, here's my guy.
Right. You actually made a comment about that on Twitter a couple of days ago.
Yes, I did. I got hammered for that.
and a professor, it doesn't matter what her name is, but somewhere in the country.
Kent State.
At Kent State, basically in effect accused you of being racist, sort of, and then I offered to debate or have them both come on the show and have an open exchange of ideas. She then followed up that you should be deplatformed in general, and then of course she declined the offer. And
I don't debate denialists. She says.
Right.
I'm not even sure what I was denying.
Denying us of what, though?
Yes, that's what I never.
But I just thought it was a perfect example of all this, that you just made a case for something, and then we opened up an option. Like, let's have a talk, and then immediately no, and Michael should be deplatformed in other places,
Right.
which is a huge problem.
And the moment you say like things are getting better, people hear. So you're saying they're perfect now, and there's no issues with race at all in America. No. Just a little reflection and bigger picture. 50 years ago, interracial marriage was a thing. Remember? No, I don't either. We're too young.
Right.
But in 1950s, only 4% of Americans agreed that it was okay for blacks and whites to get married. 4%. Now pollsters don't even ask.
Yeah.
And gay marriage, in 20 years, they won't even ask anymore because everyone will accept it'll be no big deal.
Yeah.
So it's good to just remember, no, it's not perfect. There's still homophobes and racists, yes, but far fewer. And so we're doing something right, so we should figure out what it is we've been doing and do more of that.
Yeah, I'm not even gay. I got married for the social justice, which isn't even working
Now that's a
that
commitment.
well for me. Because I don't just say shit, I do it. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. I'm curious. We've mentioned the alt-right a couple times here. How many of you? Because I can't really put a number on it or just get a general sense. How many of you think that it's an actual real white supremacist movement versus just a meme war and Kekistan and Pepe and frogs and all that? Because I actually think it's more of that, not to say that there aren't some white supremacists there. So how many of you think it's actually like this really intensely racial movement? The Nazis not even giving me anything. And how many of you think it's really just this meme war and about Pepe? Really? Yeah.
It's mislabeled by the mainstream media.
Yeah. So Hillary did make it a thing when she brought it up.
It's just to fit their narrative.
Yeah. All right. So we'll get to that a little bit. So
After just one introduction from some history. After Waco and Ruby Ridge, there was all this media focus on the militias.
Yeah.
And you would think there were militias in every neighborhood, hundreds of thousands of guys out there just, stacked with their guns and everything. And then after 9/11, they just disappeared. And it's just like, where did they go?
It really shows disconnect between the mainstream media and people of your age. Because when I do these events, people come up to me after and they'll be like, "Hey Dave, I'm Pepe of Kekistan on Twitter." And it's like a black trans, one-armed frog or something. I don't know. But I'm curious about the chilling effect, because it seems to me that is what's affecting you guys the most. Because I get people all the time saying, "Dave, I'm afraid to post a clip of you. You had Michael on. I'm afraid to post this clip because I don't want to be defriended or told I'm a racist or any of that stuff." And I think this chilling effect is actually a bigger threat to free speech than what we're dealing with the First Amendment. So let's put aside government for a second. But the chilling effect, have you guys ever seen it be this intense? Or is this just that people have social media now, so we put opinions out there all the time? And because I know people are afraid to just say what they think.
I think it's worse today. I think social media has played into it. But part of the reason I think it's worse is that a lot of it represents the kind of ascendancy of identity politics, multiculturalism, if you want to call it that, intersectionality, and these ideas that there are some ideas we can't even talk about without in some way causing harm to somebody else. I peg it to that, and then I think social media has caused that to just sort of multiply it. And then, so we've become more sensitive because there's a body of ideas out there that effectively hold that we should be sensitive, philosophically I would put it as it's a rejection of the idea that we can reason and think for ourselves and communicate with each other and resolve our differences. If you toss reason out the window, what you get is emotionalism, and ultimately you get force. But if you don't really believe you can communicate with people, the only way you can deal with one another is through feelings and through emotionalism, and I think that's a large part of what we're seeing. And social media really drives that.
How do you deal with this as someone that is at a school that you have to deal with young people, and you're aware of this stuff, but I know you don't want to offend your students intentionally and intentionally upset people. how do you thread that line to do
It
that?
depends where you're at. I've taught at public schools, I've taught at private colleges, which is where I'm at now. And Chapman, where I'm teaching now, is pretty centrist. You know, they have Republicans and Libertarians and so forth. So I'm a little less censoring there, but if I'm at a public institution, college or university, I can tell that I have to be a little more careful about. And this actually goes back to like the 70s when the whole political correctness movement really began. It's accelerating now because of social media, but it was there. Like when I went to Pepperdine, I graduated from Pepperdine University in Malibu. It didn't hurt that it was in Malibu. But this was, 1975, 76, I was there, and everyone was reading Atlas Shrugged. This was like required reading, holed up in your dorm room with that cinder block of a book. And I just thought, well, okay, this is great stuff. Everyone likes it. And then I went to Cal State Fullerton, which is a big state university, 30,000 students. And it was like I was reading Torquemada's witch hunting manual or something. So I just quit telling people that I read this book, already sort of self-censoring, just because who wants the trouble over dinner or whatever?
Yeah.
Unless you want to mix it up, you just learn to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, how many of you guys feel that you're doing the self-censorship thing on social media? I mean, yeah, pretty much everybody, that's why when I've done this on my show, I talk more about what we're doing to ourselves than the government. But let's not give the government a total pass here.
Yeah.
You mentioned the things that you don't like about Trump. He obviously has an authoritarian side. We've given a tremendous amount of power to the executive branch, and now we've got a guy who's happy to use it. And by the way, they all are, unfortunately. But what are the threats right now on the government side? And I'm sure we're going to get back to the rest.
I mean, the biggest one, since we're on a campus, the biggest one that I see that affects speech on campus is it's a law called Title IX. And essentially what it does is it puts restrictions on, the whole idea is it's a law that's supposed to prevent discrimination in schools that get government funding. When you think about government funding, if you extend that, the law does, to government guaranteed loans, you're talking about pretty much every single school in the country, private or public, doesn't matter. So what they've recently done about 5 or 6 years ago is that they created a whole new category called hostile environment, which is a vague category, and you can get both students and professors can get brought up on charges under this law for saying off-color remarks, for having a relationship that goes bad where one person in the relationship claims it was not consensual anymore. They're not, the tribunals are not like courts of law, they're done in secret. And there's an author right now, a woman by the name of Laura Kipnis, who I hope you've heard of. She's written some articles about this. She just came out with a whole book. I forget, what's the title of her book now? You guys remember? Anyway, we'll think of it, but she's a great writer. I definitely encourage you to read up on this. That's a law that is effectively, it's bringing the government into practically every relationship. Putting the government is like putting a bureaucrat in the classroom, a censor, who gets to redline out things that the professor says or that the students say. Or, imagine the same thing, and this is really creepy, but in your bedroom, I don't think there was full consent there. And it's putting the government and meddling in our affairs and making decisions about how we conduct our lives, and people are actually getting prosecuted under this law. And it's a really bad trend because it doesn't appear to be a direct attack on free speech. By and large, anti-discrimination laws have been upheld by the Supreme Court. I think those laws are a mistake for reasons we can talk about, although I get the intention behind them. But this is a really bad example of a law that's gone wrong that is putting government into every college classroom. And I think it'll only get worse if we don't do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love labels, and yet I have to talk about them often on my show because I feel like otherwise we'll get lost in just hour-long discussions and pinning down every idea. But for the three of us up here, we have someone that identifies as an objectivist. I think you would consider yourself a libertarian.
Libertarian,
basically.
classical liberal, as you've defined it.
Yeah, and I consider myself liberal, and yet it's free speech that brings us all together.
Yeah, yeah.
So is that really the only way out of this? That really fighting for liberalism, for true liberalism, that fighting for a live and let live attitude, fighting for the government not to be in your house or at your school and all that really is the only answer and the only antidote here, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe now's a good time to sort of go over the reasons. why we should have free speech. Not just the government stopping us, but why you should talk to other people or listen to what they have to say. Why? Okay, so the deepest reason is you might be wrong. In fact, most of us, most of the time, are wrong about pretty much most of the stuff we believe. And the only way to find out is by having somebody tell you, you're wrong. How do you know? Well, okay, so then you go back and forth and think, well, I'm right about this and wrong about that. And the history of science has been based on this idea of open peer review, open dialogue. You not just you're open to it, but you will be critiqued. You will not be published until we have someone critique you. And that's what's driven progress in science, is because most scientific ideas are wrong. Most scientists, even the most famous ones like Newton, was wrong about most of the stuff. He's famous for the ones he got right. But the fact that they laughed at the Wright brothers, they laughed at the Marx brothers. Being laughed at doesn't mean you're right. Most of the time you're wrong, and there's a good reason people are laughing at you for your crazy idea. So the best book on this, the short book, 1859, On Liberty, by John Stuart Mill, just articulates why. First, it's not just your right to speak; it's the listener's right to hear what someone else to say. Second, you might be wrong about everything, and the only way to find out is talking to somebody. Third, you might be partially wrong, and you can correct your ideas and refine them and improve your own ideas. Fourth, you might be completely right, but you can't really articulate why you're right. Like I wrote this book on the Holocaust deniers and their claims. Why they say what they do, what they say, and here's their argument. So basically, I had like 25 different arguments. Because I said, when I interviewed them, what are your best arguments? And they gave them to me. So I went and searched the answers. Most of the Holocaust historians I met and interviewed at the time didn't know the answers to these questions. Now, most of them were really trivial little things, like why the door at the gas chamber at Mauthausen doesn't lock. And if you're gassing people, surely you would lock the door, because they're going to not sit there, right? So I actually went to Mauthausen, and sure enough, there's the door, and it has this big handle. You go like this. And when you go like that, a thing comes out like that, like there's something in the door jamb that it locks into, but there's nothing there. So I'm there with the guide. I'm like, the door doesn't lock. And she's like, the door, some 19-year-old, the door doesn't lock. I don't know why. Don't you think that's it? So I get the next person up, the door doesn't lock? I said, yeah, haven't you ever noticed the door doesn't lock? Doesn't it seem kind of weird? And so next thing, I get the head of the whole Mauthausen Museum. And he's like, what's this now about the door not locking? I'm like, yeah, don't you think? And now I'm there with Alex Groban, who's an Orthodox Jew. He's got the yarmulke on, the whole thing, so we don't think we're neo-Nazis there to cause trouble, right?
Right.
So, anyway,
You can look over there.
Yes.
Look at me. That's fine.
yeah, so the next thing I know, we're back filming and taking notes and stuff, and they come over and they go, you have a telephone call, Dr. Sherman. It's like, me? Yeah, it's the head of the Minister of All Interior of Austria. And he's like, what's this about the door? Not locking. I said, don't you think that's kind of weird? And anyway, ultimately, years later, I finally tracked it down. The door was taken off after the war, sent to a museum in Hungary where it's there now, and they just stuck some other door on there because they're just sort of slapdashing the thing together to open it up as a museum. Now, so why would any Holocaust historian know that? Okay, they probably wouldn't know that. Now we know that. Okay, so there's a whole laundry, but the only way to find out those kinds of things, and it scales up from trivial stuff to like how many people were actually killed at Auschwitz. That number has gone from 4 million to about 1 million. What happened? Well, free speech, open dialogue. All right? So then finally, can you say why you think the Earth is round, since that's a new thing, the flat earthers? Can you explain why evolution is true? I know it's true. Everybody tells me it's true. Can you give me 5 reasons how you know it's true? Or that the Holocaust happened, or that vaccines don't cause autism, or that the Earth is getting warmer and it's primarily human caused. How do you know? Well, the only way to find out is to actually articulate it, and if you have to debate somebody, or at least just talk to them.
So it's a beautiful thing what you're saying, because then the answer is knowledge. Yeah. And the people that would deplatform these speakers, or that would allow for all of these warnings so that people won't come into rooms to listen to things, they're the ones that are actually stifling knowledge. It's not that they're just stifling the idea of speech, but true knowledge and learning, and being able to counter a point.
If you can't, okay, so you take someone like Ben Shapiro, this guy is super articulate on the conservative side, all right? So every liberal in every college campus should go to his show and listen and take notes, and then go back and figure out, okay, what's my counter to this? This guy's making a good argument. If I can't counter it, maybe I ought to think about my, instead, it's like, I don't want to hear what he has to say. All right, then, okay, so maybe you still hold your beliefs and you still think you're right, but you go out in the world and you can't even explain to somebody why you're right. But at least if you went to the debate and you took notes and you thought about it, you could say, I have 3 reasons why I'm against gun control or for gun control, or pro-life or pro, whatever it is. If you can't articulate it in half a dozen points, then what have you got? Nothing.
So Steve, what do you think happened to the left here? Because the left, as I once knew it, was tolerant of a diversity of thought, not just of those immutable characteristics that you mentioned. And unfortunately, they don't seem to be, which is why, Berkeley will burn. And even a guy, as you just said, Ben Shapiro, who's just a smart conservative thinker. He's just thought of as a conservative. Really, you may disagree with his ideas, but he certainly isn't a radical in any way. He even gets, banned from campus and had to, I forget what school it was at. Then remember what school he was at?
DePaul?
DePaul. Yeah, where he's now banned. He's officially banned from DePaul. That guy's 5'4". I mean, sorry, Ben, if you're watching.
But he's big in spirit.
No, but he is big in spirit, and he's big in the mind, and that's actually what matters. So, what happened to the left here? Because debating those ideas, for example, if there was a group of Marxist, communist, anti-capitalist speakers at any school, nobody would protest. None of you guys would show up and protest. Maybe you'd go out and see for a second what's going on. But that would be it. They'd speak to a couple people. I think their ideas would be poor, and it would be left at that. But if you bring on a basic mainstream conservative, or someone a little further to the right even, or someone like Milo especially, all hell breaks loose. What happened to the tolerance of the so-called tolerant people?
So a couple points. One, I think ultimately it comes down to this. The reason the Marxists could speak is because there's a sympathy of ideas between the Marxist and the really hardcore, what you call the regressive left, who are opposing free speech. They're sympathetic, and it's actually more than just sympathetic. You can draw a line between Marx and a lot of the postmodernist leftists and multiculturalists and identity politics people who are opposing free speech today. I think there's a direct connection between those. But let me hasten to point out, I don't think, you and I have talked about this before, I wouldn't put it in left-right terms, strictly speaking. I would more put it as, what happened to those on the left who used to support free speech but don't anymore? And there are elements of the right that don't support free speech. Certainly today, it's interesting. When I was in law school, everybody who was considered a liberal was considered a hardcore free speech advocate, and the attacks were coming from the right. I remember a time when the Attorney General, Ed Meese, John Ashcroft, these guys were going after pornographers as like the big thing they needed to do. Even after 9/11, they spent time and government money going after pornographers. Like, what the hell's wrong with these people? We have people who are trying to murder us, and you're worried about what movies people are watching in the privacy of their own home. That was on the right. So you can see this across the spectrum. But what ultimately you're seeing there among like the regressive left is I think it's a philosophical view. It's a view that, to put it in, let's start with the Marxist terms. Marx believed essentially that society was divided up into warring classes of oppressors and oppressed. And so the postmodernists and the multiculturalists, whether you call them left or right, they've adopted it and absorbed these ideas and slightly changed it. So it's not capitalists versus proletarians or labor versus business, although to some extent it is. It's black versus white. It's gay versus straight. It's man versus woman, the patriarchy, and it's this idea that society is inherently composed of oppressors and oppressed, and that none of these groups can really communicate with one another. Marx even believed that there was such a thing as bourgeois logic and proletarian logic, and that they couldn't communicate with one another. Now, if you put it in more common terms, I would put it this way. If you believe crazy things, you have two choices when people who have rational ideas confront you. You can either change your mind and really take seriously what they're saying and think hard, or you can oppose their right to speak or shout them down. If you really want to hold on to ideas that are false and crazy, you're going to shout them down. And I think that's what's going on a lot of people. They don't want to abandon the idea is for a whole variety of reasons. And so instead they shout down the speakers, they attack the speakers.
So sometimes people will say to me, well, Dave, if someone's shouting you down, they're using their speech. That's speech. That's not violence.
Yeah.
What's the proper response to that?
Well, again,
Because that's not a legal issue.
No,
there's
that's right.
a societal
That's right.
contract.
That's right. Well, okay, so I mean, again, the only way you can find out how strong your positions are is to actually engage with me. Right? So just saying, I don't want to hear what you have to say already tells us something about the confidence of your own beliefs. You must not have much confidence. You can't argue them, even though I don't think they're aware of that. All right. So, but let me just kind of do a slight end run around this from the other perspective. My friend Carol Tavris, who's one of the world's great social psychologists, and she was one of the main leaders of the second wave feminists, who's now very disturbed about the third wave, intersectionality, feminism, and the whole oppression and all that stuff, and the fainting couch feminism. You know, it's like she says, what we stood up for was women to be strong and get out there in the world, and now it's, you know, it's like we're weak and helpless in the face of the patriarchy. Okay, so although she does remind me that as a white male, you know, I don't know what it's like. Okay, it's true. I don't know what it's like. So I went to.
Should I have them all boo and hiss you?
Yes,
as a white male? Guys, I got a white male here.
I tweeted something out. You know, there was some stuff about the patriarchy, and I said, "Fuck the patriarchy." That's what I would say. No, fuck the patriarchy. I'm thinking, well, that's easy for you to say. You're the patriarchy. Like, well, what? No, what? But in sympathy, so like at Chapman, they have a safe space group for the LGBTQA community. So. And they had a meeting last semester, so I went to it. I just wanted to see what it was all about. Because all this safe space stuff has been in the news. All right, so and they were all LGBTQA people, and they just wanted to talk about, you know, we have this place where we go and we hang out, and we just talk amongst ourselves, and you know, it's like a social group. I'm like, all right, so this is like me and my cycling buddies. We like to hang out. All right, well that's pretty normal. Okay, but then it kind of started. Well, you know, there's all this, you know, oppression and homophobia and stuff, and incidents on campus. Okay, Chapman is one of the nicest, peaceful campuses you'll ever be on. It's the safest space I've ever seen, the whole campus. Anyway, it's like, okay, how many incidences are there? Because they were saying, oh, it's getting worse and worse. How many are there? Like one a day, one a week, one a year? What are we talking about? How many were there last year, the year before versus this year? Don't know. We don't actually keep track. But I get a lot of emails. Okay, well, you know, the recency bias and the confirmation bias, you know, that's not reliable. Give me an incident. Just give me an example. Okay, so gay couple walking on the sidewalk on the fringes of the campus. Guy in a pickup truck walks by. You know, they're holding hands. Guy in a pickup truck walks by and makes a homophobic slur, something, you know, fuck you faggot, something like this. All right, and I didn't say this, but why didn't you just say fuck off, asshole? Yeah. You know, because that's what I would do. Yeah. Now Carol says, Michael, you don't understand. You could get beaten 50 years ago. You would have gotten the shit beat out of you for saying that, right? And also fuck the patriot. Okay, you know, I'm largely self-employed, middle-aged, white guy. I can't be touched by an employer. You know, no one's going to harm. No one has any economic control over me or much political power over me. So it's easy for me to say that. What if, Carol says to me, you're in a large corporation. Your boss is harassing you, hitting on you. He's a homophobe. He's a racist. Whatever. You can't say fuck off, asshole, because there goes your job, and you got a mortgage to pay. So I'm sympathetic to that. Like, yeah, okay, all right. I don't know. I'm not sure what the right.
Right, but
so that's where the law comes in, right?
Yeah.
So we need the law to come in and.
Definitely.
But you know, it's interesting because I mentioned this when we did this last night in Austin, that part of this oppression Olympics that's happening right now. I don't know if you guys saw this, but the LA Gay Pride Parade in West Hollywood. Which West Hollywood is the gayest place on earth. They have rainbow crosswalks. It's gayer than Oz. This is a gay place. They actually canceled it this year. It's in June, and instead of a parade, they're doing a protest march. They're doing an intersectional protest march to talk about everybody's oppression because they can't allow. They need the gays to be an oppressed group, so they can't even give them a day to. I don't even like putting on foam or whatever they're doing. I'm not even into it. But you know, you get on a float and go do some shit, but they can't even have them celebrating for a day. And interesting, at an economic level, it'll just hurt the local businesses and people are going out for drinks and all that stuff. And that sort of shows you the as you said, intersectionality of all this. We can't have you're supposed to be oppressed. We can't have you having fun. That's not how this whole operation works.
I like Heather McDonald's point she made a few articles ago about the reversal of in loco parentis on college campuses. So in the 50s and 60s, the students started pushing back against the administration and faculty acting like they're their parents. You know, you go from home to college, and basically you're in your dorm, and they have all these rules. And like Pepperdine, we weren't even allowed in the girls' dorms, and vice versa. No dancing was allowed because that could really break out into something sexual. And then so the whole pushback originally was, leave us alone, don't be our parents. We're adults now. And now that it seems to be going the reverse direction. We want the faculty, administration, and deans to come in and intervene and tell us what Halloween costumes we can wear. When it gets down to that, that's back to the in loco parentis, and it's come full cycle.
Yeah. So are the inmates running the asylum at colleges? I don't mean these kids, because they obviously get it. But that in general, we now have professors that are just truly afraid to say what they think, and they do all these studies, and what is it? Something like only 7% of college professors identify as conservative, or at least not liberal, or not progressive, or whatever it is. That we've just given too much power, and now it's like the wave has started, and we can't put that thing back.
I think, to some extent that's definitely true. Although it's worth noting, I still think that this is a minority phenomenon, even on college campuses. I don't think most college students are, although you guys, one of the great things about interacting with students is to get your perspectives on these. So if anybody has comments on this during the Q&A, we'd love to hear them. But my sense is not like, most college kids are crazed, identity politics, lunatics who want to shut down the professors or bring Title IX actions against them. What I think you have is a vocal minority of students, and by minority here I mean just in numbers, and then a kind of in a sense, complacent majority, or a majority that doesn't know what to do about it. They've been morally disarmed, is the way I put it. And they've been guilted into thinking, I really shouldn't talk back to these people because I've been taught my whole life they're oppressed and that they'll hurt their feelings, and I shouldn't speak out. And so, there's a way in which a very small group of people really can have an outsized effect. And it's part of the reason we need to have more of these kinds of discussions to kind of embolden people to speak up. But I'm not convinced that the inmates are running the asylum yet, although I am convinced that some really bad ideas have taken root in college over the last, I would say, roughly half century, and we're seeing sort of the results of those ideas today. And I ultimately think this is a battle of ideas. We really need to teach people how to think. We need to teach them critical thinking, which is one of the things that Michael teaches. We need to teach them what good ideas are. We need to teach them the best parts of the Enlightenment tradition. Sure, throw out the horrible parts of the founding of America. Slavery was a horrible thing. But the Enlightenment tradition is about the individual. It's about reason. It's about the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of truth. Those are all absolutely essential to the good life, to living the good life, to living in a country like America or in the West, or really anywhere. Western, I think of the West as a body of ideas, not a location. And that's the I'll use a term here, the fountainhead of civilization. That's what we have to keep going. That's what we have to teach people. And I think what you're seeing and have been seeing in the last 50 years is a kind of counter-Enlightenment body of ideas that are really attacking those foundations. And that's what we need to teach kids to. We need to teach them better ideas.
Yeah, well, that was a beautiful Atlas Shrugged-like ending to this because it's 7 o'clock, so we just did an hour, but we'll open this up for an hour or so for you guys to ask some questions and take it away. First, we give these guys a round of applause. There we go.
Well, I was arrested at this university back in the 80s for passing out pamphlets I wrote about Holocaust denial and the Kennedy assassination. I was actually thrown in jail. And I got a lawyer and we sued the university. We established the free speech zones here. But I just want to say really quick, Mr. Shermer, I met you at a psychedelic drug conference, and I think I ear-banged you while you were eating lunch about the Holocaust and what it really means. And the best evidence is forensic, the forensic examination of the murder weapon, the chemicals they used. They supposedly dumped this cyanide through the holes in the ceiling, which isn't what they would do. They would have used a circulation device, which they used in the Laos disinfestation chambers. And then at Treblinka, they allegedly used diesel fuel, which has inert amounts of carbon monoxide. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Oh boy, okay, well.
So read the article, right? Did you write on this?
Yes, I wrote a whole
Yeah,
book
so
called
anybody
Deny
who's
It,
confused
Deny
about
It,
this
Forget It.
issue, read what Michael has written about it.
I mean, I know all the forensic arguments, they're all there in my book. Yeah. Well, I mean, we could get into the weeds of it if you want. There's been a lot more research since I wrote my book. I mean, since the David Irving trial, a lot of research, because he based his arguments on the Leuchter report, which was flawed. This guy went to Auschwitz first of all, he went to Auschwitz I, which is not where the big gassings happened. Happened at Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is the second camp. The first camp. So he goes in there and he knocks chips of concrete off the inside of this makeshift gas chamber that the Russians built after the war because it was demolished. So it's not even the real thing. And then he has it's like this thick. Well, the Zyklon B staining in concrete would only go in about 10 microns, like a quarter of a thickness of a human hair. So if you grind it up, this huge fist-sized chunk of concrete, and then take it to a forensic chemist and say what's in there, they're not going to find Zyklon B. So they go, oh look, there was no one gassed in here. So if there's no one gassed in this room, there's no one gassed in any of the gas chambers here at Auschwitz. If no one gassed at Auschwitz, no one was gassed anywhere during the Second World War. If no one was gassed anywhere, then there was no Holocaust, and it goes on and on like that. Okay. So it's super flawed reasoning, and the science is completely wrong. Because at Majdanek, we do have the blue staining, and you can look on Google it to see the pictures. You can see the rich blue staining, which was not in the delousing chambers, but in the homicidal gas chambers, which are a separate part of the camp. Anyway, I could go on for 2 hours, but let's just...
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the broader point is that without getting lost in relitigating the Holocaust, that you're here and we welcome you
That's
to
right,
speak.
yeah, that's right.
And by the way, you're going to walk out here and I don't think anyone's going to punch you, and I find your ideas rather disgusting, but that's okay. You say your thing, I say mine, and there we go. And that's really what the spirit of this is. So
Can I just offer
Yeah.
one? It's a really quick point. I agree with everything that you guys said. You know more. You've forgotten more about the Holocaust than I ever knew in my life, and I agree. But what you just saw is an example of real thinking and real reasoning going on, and you can tell the difference. You can tell the difference between real thought. It's mustering evidence, paying careful attention. He actually went to Auschwitz. All right, I mean that's the difference between just blabbering about things and really tracking down and thinking hard. And so I mean I just want to note that's what it looks like, and you can tell the difference between those two things. So I'll leave it at that.
And you can tell when somebody's not really interested in the truth. Like
Yeah.
David Irving had this whole thing about no holes, no Holocaust. It was a t-shirt. And what that means is at Prima 2, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, what she said, the eyewitnesses said the SS guards got up on the roof of the subterranean gas chamber and poured the Zyklon B pellets through these wire mesh columns, that the heated room, the room heated by all the people that are in there, causes the gas, the Zyklon B gas, to come off of the clay pellets and kill them. All right, so that's the story. Now, so Irving goes, hey, there's no holes on the roof of the gas chamber. So where would they have poured the Zyklon? Okay, so I went there, and there's no holes because there's no roof. The Nazis dynamited it on January 20th, 1945, when the Russians were just about closing in. It's just rubble. Even so, there's some big chunks, which I found what looked like a hole. So I crawled in there to see what I could find. It's 50 years of weathering, so there's not much to see. Right? So I showed him a picture. David, look, here's a hole. And and he just completely ignores it and just goes right on repeating the same. It's like, okay, this guy isn't interested in actually figuring out what happened. He's got a shtick.
right.
And
And
the
they
story.
move the goalposts also,
They-
right?
they
Like, so
move the goalposts.
even if he conceded that, which most likely they won't, then they go to something else.
That's right.
Sorry, we got a lot of people.
So my question is for Dave, but if you two have similar backstories, I would love to hear your opinion on this too. So, what some of us might not know is that Mr. Rubin actually used to be on the Young Turks.
You can boo. It's all right.
But he has since left, and I wanted to know what exactly was the that moment that made you realize, oh, maybe these guys aren't really the best fit for me. If there was a moment, or if it just gradually happened, and I mean, I don't know about the other two presenters' backstories, if they were involved with similar groups as well, but I want to know what was it that made you turn?
Well, it's interesting. My politics are almost exactly the same right now as they were 15 years ago, and probably when I first got into politics in like 7th grade in 1988. There were a couple moments, but I think the highlight of it was, and I'm sure all of you have seen this already, but when Sam Harris was on Real Time and Batman called him gross and racist, that was the wake up to me, sort of as to what was going on with the left and using the words of racist and bigot and homophobe and all of these things. And unfortunately, my boss, Cenk, he just went in on it. He just decided to go in on it. If you watch it, if you have 3 hours that you want to be drubbed over the head, there's an interview with Cenk and Sam, and where Sam just calmly sits there for 3 hours, just really pinpoint precision, destroying Cenk's logic. And I realized after that I just didn't want to work there. But I stayed there for a couple months, and I had to figure out what I was going to do. But then Steve mentioned Charlie Hebdo, which happened about 4 months later, and I was on air, and I'm sure you can find the video. And I was saying, no, you cannot, with no exceptions, you cannot. There's nothing to give here. You cannot kill cartoonists. There's no excuse. Yes, you can make fun of people. And one of the hosts, who wasn't Cenk, started screaming about something about 90% of the covers were about Islam. And I said to him, you can find the video. I said, I don't think that it was. I said, I don't have the answer, but I don't think it was 90%. And I'm sure some of you know the real number. It's something like, I think it's 3 out of 597 covers. They had done more on Judaism and on Christianity and all that. And just that sort of hysterical craziness instead of logic really was the moment that I decided to move on.
90% was a alternative fact.
That was fake news before it was cool. All right, Boba Fett, let's go.
In a climate of where events are canceled and speakers are evacuated, the right to listen can't be invoked enough. From a legal standpoint, when is that presumed in the Constitution or Bill of Rights, or do we need to amend the First Amendment?
You want me to take that?
Yeah, I think that one's...
There's definitely a right to listen, but if you think about the logic of free speech and how it works, it's rarely invoked, because in order to have a right to listen, you first have to have a speaker that you want to listen to, and typically that's the person who is bringing the claim. So it's sort of implicit, but rarely litigated, because you always have somebody who's being shut down before you have somebody who can't listen to them, and then the guy who can't listen isn't going to bring their separate claim. So it's not. I don't think it's that the First Amendment needs to be amended. I think it does what it should do. People need to pay more attention to violations. Now, the problem is that a lot of this stuff is happening on college campuses, and college campuses, they don't. The First Amendment doesn't apply the same way on a college campus as it does just to a private individual versus the government. When someone shuts down your talk, the question ultimately becomes, what did the college allow, and who has the rights? And especially if it's on a private university, take Middlebury, right? Middlebury had no obligation whatsoever to invite Charles Murray, and they could have invited him and said, Charles, we're going to invite you, and we're also going to allow students to chant and drown out your talk. And this is going to be part of your agreement, and he can agree to do that. He'd be crazy to do it. Now, they can't invite him and say, and by the way, then a mob will attack you. That's against the law, whether you can't consent to that, and rightly so. You can't consent to criminal behavior. But so I don't think it's a First Amendment issue in a lot of the drowning people out and not allowing people to listen. It is, though. It's colleges having the backbone to do something about this. But it's also a criminal issue. Before it becomes even a First Amendment issue, it's a simple criminal issue. When Charles Murray and Professor Laura Stanger were attacked, that was a crime. When Middlebury invited Murray to speak, and a bunch of people stood up and drowned him out so he couldn't be heard, in my view, that is a violation of Middlebury's rights, at least, right? And those people should have been disciplined and possibly prosecuted. At Claremont McKenna College, when a group of students circles the building in a human chain and physically prevents people from going in the building, that is an arrestable offense. That's a crime. It's certainly something that the college should take seriously. So if we want to take seriously the right to listen, college administrators and the police have to be willing to stand up
What
and
law
actually
is that?
enforce the law.
What is
I
that?
mean, the law would be trespass, it would be battery if you actually prevent somebody from, it would be assault. I mean, there's all kinds of laws. I think in that case, in the Claremont case, because there was an agreement, that there was a whole Facebook group dedicated to people who said, we're gonna shut this down.
Right.
They didn't just say, let's go have a protest, let's chant outside the building. That's, as long as the university allows that kind of thing, and I think they do, then that's perfectly fine and legal. What they said is, meet up there and we're gonna shut this down. That's a conspiracy, right? That's a
Yeah.
conspiracy to violate the rights of at least Claremont McKenna College, if not the speaker herself, but that the speaker's rights are derivative. It's really the college's right. And they did nothing about it. He wants the videos, the cops just stand there and they let it all happen. I mean, riots at Berkeley, riots for God's sake, that's violence. I mean,
Right.
you're not allowed to riot. And there's multiple laws that prevent that. At the Milo talk, and then over the last weekend, we saw the same kind of thing over the Trump rallies. That's crazy. When cops are standing by and letting that happen, that is lawlessness. So before we even get to the First Amendment issue, the police and the authorities have to be willing to stand up and say, we're not going to allow this to happen. Absolutely, we draw the line at violence, at force. You will not be allowed to do this. At the very least, if you do this kind of thing, if students engage in this, you will be expelled from this university. If they did that, I think a lot of this kind of thing would stop.
Yeah, and the wall thing I think is hilarious because I spoke at UCLA with Milo, and these kids created a wall around it, and it's like, well, I guess they're not against walls, they're just against walls. So, like, they're kind of pro-wall in a way. What do you got?
Really funny.
Hello. Earlier you talked about Title IX and some of the the tribunals that kind of went along with that. Some have described them as almost like kangaroo courts. And looking at cases such as the Duke lacrosse case,
Yeah.
or even University of Virginia, would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely, and the place to read, I won't say much about this, I'll just say, go check out the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, otherwise known as FIRE. They have a website that has just a wealth of information about this. Alan Charles Kors and Harvey Silverglate, who founded that organization back in the, I think, late 90s, wrote a book called The Shadow University, filled with examples of these kinds of kangaroo courts. Laura Kipnis, now follow her and read her book on this. I haven't read it yet, but I've read her articles. She's really articulate. And by the way, she's a fabulous writer and really interesting person. So read all about that. And yes, kangaroo courts is a perfect example or perfect description of what those are.
Yeah, and I know you guys get it about fake news and the bullshit mainstream media and all that. Go back and look at articles. I mean, look at the Rolling Stone article. Look at all the articles that they were already convicting these kids before this stuff happened.
As everyone knows, sites like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit are very important for sharing ideas, and they're widely used and very important to free speech. But these companies have discretion over what they can censor. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you see the future of free speech on social media?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem that unfortunately I'm dealing with at this very moment. I mean, look, first off, they don't have to give us a platform, right? We don't pay for this stuff. So let's be clear. They're companies. They can do whatever they want. If they want to ban Milo, they can. I personally think it's the wrong choice, but they can do that. They don't have to allow me to put my show up there. All of those things. Facebook doesn't have to do anything for you, you know? They're stealing your life and your soul, but they don't technically have to do anything for you.
And selling it.
And selling it to the highest bidder. But it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. I mean, even just this past week, on Monday, I posted a video with a young girl named Yasmin Mohammed, who's an ex-Muslim, and all we talked about was liberalism and freedom and liberty and how to fight the bad ideas that would stifle your speech and anyone else's speech, and they demonetized it. And then we wrote to them and submitted a claim and all that, and they just sent us back a form letter. So we're sort of held hostage. That's not direct censorship of me. We put the videos up there, but if I can't make any money doing the work that I do, then they'll just sort of funnel people into talking about other things. And it's very clear what they don't want you to talk about. They don't want you to talk about Islam. They don't want you to talk about free speech. They don't want you to talk about feminism and a couple of other things. It's one of the reasons I'm on Patreon. So there are ways to get out. If you're smart, you're thinking, you can figure out ways to do it. And maybe one of you guys will come up with the next platform. But I think we all kind of got in on this, and we got it for free, and we thought that they would just bend to us. But they're companies, and they'll only respect us at the end if we stop giving them all of our information and our pictures and our clicks. So I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know if you guys know.
The only thing, so I'll put in a quick plug for capitalism as awesome because, and seriously, because, the solution to this is competition. And I think someone will come up with, if they're not, especially because of the kind of thing that Dave and others are doing, that they're showing that there's a huge market out here. If YouTube falls down on the job, so to speak, and gives up this market, somebody else will pick it up. And that's one of the beauties of capitalism. With competition, you get new ideas. I actually am old enough to remember a time when there were only 3 TV networks, right? You remember that?
No,
Dave's,
no, I don't.
Dave doesn't remember that. But and what happened? Competition, and today you guys don't even know that there were only, now you have a gazillion channels. The other thing to think about is that there are all kinds of people out there, and again, so this is a plug for rich people who put their money where their mouths are, and specifically the Koch brothers. I'm a big fan of the Koch brothers. Everybody hates the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers have been funding sensible speech on liberal and libertarian ideas and pro-capitalist ideas for as long as I've been doing this, for over 30 years. Everybody hates their guts, but they've been, funding alternative ways of good ideas getting to people. I'm not saying necessarily the Koch brothers are going to, save Dave or YouTube or anything like that. I am saying that that it's people who have earned lots of money, saved it, have lots of capital, who are going to solve this problem.
One response to that, by the way, I always point out that the left has their billionaires like.
Oh, that's true, and that's how as it should be. That's what freedom is all about.
Yeah. I am curious. I mentioned the giving the nuclear codes to the enemy. That would not be protected by free speech.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about, from a legal point of view, Snowden and WikiLeaks, and where between us talking and the nuclear codes, where do you draw the line?
So I think Snowden. I'm pretty sure I would describe Snowden as a hero for what he did. But it's unquestionably clear that he violated the law. Now, so there's a whole issue here of what should be classified, what shouldn't. I recommend that if you read accounts of the Pentagon Papers case, which is a case that happened in the early 1970s, involved declassifying, or a guy who basically, like Snowden, went public with some information about the Vietnam War. It's clear to me that the government way overclassifies information. But I think Snowden, he's courageous, he's a hero. I think he's a hero. I don't know what his motives are, but let's assume for a minute he had really good motives here. It's a heroic thing that he did, but there's no question he violated the law. And there do have to be laws that I think protect, real national security secrets. Now what I would say if I were president is, he should be pardoned. Let's say something like that. But now WikiLeaks, I don't feel the same way about WikiLeaks. I think that WikiLeaks effectively is stealing information. I think the purpose that Assange has made himself public about this, his goal is to undermine governments and to undermine free governments, especially. Look where he's taken refuge. So I'm way less sympathetic to Assange, and I tend to think that he's more on the side of kind of anarchic criminal than Snowden is. But bottom line is you have to have laws like this. You also have to have people who are willing to violate the law and have test cases. That's what Martin Luther King did. That's what civil rights people did.
First of all, thank you for showing up to U of A. I recently listened to a talk between Sam Harris and Lawrence Krauss, and they both seem to share a similar criticism towards debate, stating that it was more about the takedowns and the comebacks than really the contents of the arguments. Do you guys share that criticism? And do you think that there's a more efficient way of communicating ideas? And also, is there any way I can get a group selfie with you guys after the talk?
We can do selfies after. I can confirm that. I think you're the best one to answer this because
I do a lot of debates.
Everybody.
I do a lot of debates. I enjoy it. I'm kind of competitive, and I like the mixing it up. And of course, I'm not thinking really I'm going to change the person's mind I'm debating. We're after the undecided voters there, the people that are kind of heard some of these arguments, wondered if there's something to it. whether it's, God and religion or climate change or whatever. And then I can kind of swing them over toward my side. I think there's a useful place for it. I think it's probably more constructive in conversation, like in your studio. We're going to make more ground in finding common ground between the two of us, whoever it is. But I think those are two different venues to do something. I think it's just so I think all have their place. I mean, I understand my friend Richard Dawkins. I won't debate a creationist. Looks better on their resume than mine. Okay, yeah, but he's the top alpha male, so.
Right.
Yeah, okay, Oxford Don, and so yeah, all right, I get it, fine. And not everybody likes debate, and that's okay. So there's just different ways to come at it.
Yeah, it must be for you in an age of zingers, like in the age where you want to get something so that somebody can tweet it out, and you want to be thoughtful and have an army full of knowledge. That can probably be tough. This is what we see on television.
Yes,
You can just deliver the knockout punch. That's what people.
Yeah, Hitch was really great at this. I wouldn't. I would not want to have debated Hitch even on something he knew nothing about, and I knew everything about. I mean, so, yes, there is that, and few people come up with the great lines live. As you're doing it, usually you think of it later. Dang, should have said that. At least you can tweet it out.
Right now, at least you can tweet it now.
Yeah, thanks again for coming here. So freedom of religion and freedom of expression pretty much is my question of where do we start to kind of draw the line in like weird situations? Religion kind of sometimes has some crazy ideas, or like you could use the Bible to justify slavery, or over in Europe they have banning burqas and stuff. But even private places like Dave, I know you've done the gay cake bakers. You know what? Let them be. I just won't buy their cake. It's okay. Yeah. So how do we deal with the intersection of freedom of speech and freedom of religion?
I would say you just treat religion like any other set of ideas. When people get confused about when we talk about Islam or we talk about any religion, let's say that would be anti-gay. If you said, well, this is a political party, what are their beliefs? Well, they're anti-gay and they don't want women to dress the way they want. They don't want free expression, and they want outsiders of their political party to have to pay an extra tax or a series of other things. If you frame that in a political sense, you go, that party's bonkers. I'm not going to join that party. Somehow we have this need to respect things if they come from a religious angle. Now, the three of us are not religious, and I'm happy to take a question from someone that is religious. But I think you have to treat bad ideas poorly wherever they come from, and this need to try to be nice to everybody when they're doing things that are wrong, or defending things are wrong. We all want to be nice. We're not here to shit on everybody at all. But at the same time, I'm not for gays being thrown off roofs. I know that's a radical concept. I'm not for having women wear beekeeper costumes, as Bill Maher says. And if you are liberal, and you believe in live and let live, and you truly are a feminist, and whatever else that you want to think, those are the things you should believe in. And when someone says, well, but my religion says something else, and you have to somehow respect that. No, and we just got to stop giving an inch on this. We keep doing it because we're trying to be nice, and they're just going to keep dragging us.
Well, that's just sort of part of that. In the bad old days, when people were discriminated against based on their religion, that's why we pushed back in that direction in the first place. Okay, so we've come a long way. And may I point out, as I did in my political op-ed piece this weekend, the idea that you can't get elected in America if you're not super religious. Well, we just elected a person who's probably the least religious candidate we've had in a century or two, maybe since Jefferson dined there alone. And so apparently you can't. And so that's another, and also the fastest growing religious group in America are the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, people that tick the box for no religious affiliation. 20% of all Americans.
I thought it was the Jedi.
They are the Jedi, yes. And 33%, a third of millennials, people born after 1980. So that's progress. I mean, I don't care what people believe, but in terms of not intervening in the public sphere, and there you get, legally, you get the sort of shades of gray. So, like some of my atheist friends, they want to fight over, like somebody put a cross on Interstate 10 where a policeman was killed. Okay, I'm not going after that. It's technically, yes, it shouldn't be there, but really, you're just going to piss off everybody by going after that. There's bigger issues here. So.
Yeah, all I was going to add is I think, Dave, you put your finger on the distinction, which is number one, religious ideas should be treated like any other ideas. And ultimately the question is, are you just advocating bad ideas, or are you acting on them in a way that violates the rights of another person? So you can believe in a version of Islam that holds that gays should be tossed off of roofs. You're allowed to believe that. I would criticize you and say you're a nutball. But you cannot throw people off of roofs. I mean, and it doesn't matter what your reason is, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind here. It does not matter when, like, if you're throwing a person off a roof just because you hate their guts, or because they're gay, or because your religion tells you to, or just because you're a lunatic, you're still a criminal. That's what criminal behavior is all about. And we have to be really clear on that distinction. So, I mean, that's ultimately the distinction that I think we do.
But I could do it if I was being attacked and this was self-defense.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, so then the argument would be somebody attacking my religion, and I have the absolute truth, then they are violating my rights, they are attacking me, so in self-defense, I'm throwing them off the roof. Okay, that's
Yeah,
kind of
but
the
they're
line
wrong.
of reason. They're wrong, I know they're wrong,
Right.
but that's the reason, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Hey guys. So first, a quick little just personal statement, and then a question for Dave.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm trying to how do I word this? What a difference 10 years makes. I'm Canadian, and about 10 years ago or so, I wouldn't have really wanted to be in the States because of the religious right. And now there's nowhere I'd rather be than the United States because of the regressive left.
Yeah.
And you know, it's worse than that because I went to the University of Toronto. Jordan Peterson was one of my profs. So I was at like one of the epicenters of, it's SJW Central up there. So I'd way rather be in Tucson than Toronto right now.
Yeah.
But, so that was the observation.
Isn't that where you guys applaud your school and your town? Or...
Yeah.
I know, I thought we nailed the applauding thing before. All right.
So I got a question for Dave. It's a bit of an inside baseball question. I've been following you for a long time because the Young Turks used to be my jam. Like Cenk was my hero, and one thing I've always wondered was the Armenian genocide. There's been discussion about this for 7, 8, 9, 10 years now, where people accuse him of being a denier, and he just never, as far as I can tell, talks about it. And then he's got Anna, or an Armenian, right next to him every day for 60 hours a week.
Yeah.
What is that like behind the scenes? Like, is that like an elephant in the room? Do they not talk about it? Has he talked about it? Maybe I just haven't heard about it, because it just seems like really weird. It'd be like having a Holocaust denier and a Jew on the same show, and they never talk about it.
Right.
But maybe he's not a denier, I don't know.
Yeah. This is the question you're supposed to ask me privately after, but since you did it. Well, first off, just for the record, because people do ask me this, and I've addressed it, I guess, on Twitter a little bit, but I didn't really know when I was working there that he denied the Armenian genocide. I really didn't. The summer after I left was the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, and then suddenly there were stories about it all over the place, and then I started seeing this thing that he wrote many years before. Then he was being called out on it a lot. He issued a statement, I guess, that said he doesn't know enough. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't know enough about anything, and this is the one thing he can't make an opinion on. So, yes, look, if I would not be friends with someone who denied the Holocaust, nothing personal. He denies the Armenian genocide. There's a movie coming out, by the way, I think next week, The Promise, that's going to get this back into the news, and I suspect that he's going to, again, have to answer some questions. But I think they were on Fusion, and somebody asked a question, and you can see a guy that I know grab the mic out of the questioner's hand. So it's an assault on free speech and on logic and reason and history. I don't want to comment on the Anna thing. That's for them to sort out themselves. But, the name of the group that committed the Armenian genocide was the Young Turks. They were the young group of upstart people in the Ottoman Empire who felt that the Armenians were going to grow too powerful, and they basically, took them to the deserts of now what's Syria. I don't have to give you a whole history lesson. But yes, the Armenian genocide did happen. There is a quote, maybe you know the exact quote from Hitler, saying the reason I know I can get away with this is because look what the Turks, the Ottomans did to the Armenians, and the world did do anything. So I think it's disgusting and reprehensible. I didn't know about it at the time. And it's awful. I wish I had a better explanation, but the Anna thing, that's for them to work out. So there you go. All right. Everybody tweet that out.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question was already partially answered, but anyway, still. So in the beginning of the talk, there was mentioned that the First Amendment applies to the government, but not to the private institutions. So I just wanted to ask, like, where does university that accepts money from the government lie on that scale between public and government institution? And if there is some obligation for a university to prevent the rights of the speakers to share their thoughts and rights of the listeners to hear them, then is there like a grounds for some legal action against the university for not allowing that? And is anyone trying that, or have you heard about anyone trying that? Because I haven't, and I have seen a lot of speakers being shut down.
Yeah, so you have to draw a distinction between a private university and a public university. Private universities can do whatever they want. Public universities, because they're state funded, and I mean, you know, the actual state universities are subject to the First Amendment, and essentially they're treated like public spaces, or let me put it this way, the public spaces on public universities are treated like public spaces. It doesn't mean that you can walk into a professor's class and say, this is a public university, I get to say what I want, the First Amendment protects me, so I'm gonna interrupt your lecture and just start blabbering on. That's not what the courts have held, and rightly so in my view. I mean, you couldn't administer a university, you couldn't have a university if that were the case. But if it's a public space, you do have a right to speak, and the same laws or the same rules that apply to public spaces more generally. In essence, the government can't engage in content or viewpoint discrimination. It can't say the Nazis are allowed to march, but the Holocaust denied, but some other group is not allowed to march, etc. I mean, that's actually the Nazi-Skokie case, is a famous case from I think it was the 1970s. And as far as is there anybody out there doing anything? The organization I mentioned before, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, that's what they specialize in. They sue universities when they violate free speech, or in the case of, or the First Amendment, in the case of private universities, they essentially try to use, moral suasion, and they argue that that the universities very often are not following their own internal policies. And most universities have some sort of policy on free thought, free speech, what can be said on campus, and they regularly violate them, and that's what FIRE does. So happily, FIRE is leading the charge on this. They're a very good organization, so check them out.
First of all, thank you for coming here. My question is sort of addressed to all of you. What do you think the relation is between Europe's lack of free speech and the sort of a cultural rot you see in the rising youth unemployment, the historical guilt and revisionism, and the general lack of any sort of national purpose or pride?
Oh boy, well, Europe's a big place. I mean, which country? In Germany, France?
Primarily Germany and France, yeah.
You're referring to the rise of the right in those countries, I think, because of those things.
Well, I mean, next week's the big election in France, so that's going to be telling. It remains to be seen. My wife's from Cologne, Germany, and so I get a little bit of perspective from there, and also on American politics from her, because it's quite different. But they have such a completely different history than we do in terms of the idea of a unified economic bloc like that. It's so new, and even now it appears to be unraveling a little bit. Maybe I think it's too soon to tell. I like the idea of Angela Merkel initially. We got to help these people from Syria. I mean, don't we have a moral obligation to help people that are in these horrible conditions? Yes. So she opens the gates, and then there's trouble. Okay. And they had the same sort of thing. Like in Cologne on New Year's Eve, 2 years ago, I guess it was. The women were being attacked right and left, and the German media didn't report on it. I mean, it was a real mess. And
Wasn't someone you know assaulted? Or
yeah, my wife's mom was assaulted, right? So, no one was really doing anything about it. In part because they're all so afraid, even the police, afraid to say in the media who did it. Who were they? Don't use the M word. It's even worse there than here in terms of the sensitivity of it. And I think it's too soon to say how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I would say if you go back and watch the first 10 episodes of my show in September of 2015, watch the episode with Sam and Ayan and Douglas Murray and a couple other people, we were all saying the same thing, which is that Trump will be real if we can honestly talk about ideas. So it gets to your point about with the laws that they have and free speech and the chill factor and all that stuff. Yeah, if you can't discuss ideas, the guy who's got the easy answers, in this case Trump, or maybe Le Pen, or Wilders, or whatever it is going to win. And for Wilders, he lost, but his party went up something like 30%. So, you don't have to be a genius to figure out what that will.
Hi, my name is Reese. I'm not a Nazi. And my question for you guys is, does there exist a point at which you believe you should stop someone from exercising their right to free speech if they're inciting violence? For instance, terrorism and suicide bombing. I mean, you hear stories about children committing these unspeakable acts, and oftentimes they're just the victims of very passionate rhetoric. So what is your thought on this?
Well, the direct incite to violence, I think we're all agreed on that. Yeah, right?
Yeah, the hard one is, knowing the motives of the leaders of terrorist groups versus the shock troops. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar made this point in an op-ed that, they may yell out Allahu Akbar or whatever, but the shock troops are really believers, but the leaders have political motives, and they're not really religious. And I think it's hard to say. I think human behavior is complex and multivariate. There may be multiple reasons why someone joins ISIS. Anywhere from ideological, political, religious to I get sex and money. So I don't. It's really hard to say. It depends on who we're talking about.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that I think it's the government's job to go after what I would call criminal organizations, and there are many out there in the world. ISIS is one, Al-Qaeda, there are a long list of terrorist organizations on an international, from the international standpoint. And the way I think about it is, if you, it's perfectly appropriate for government to go after the mob, the mafia, right? They're a criminal organization, and their whole purpose is to engage in crime. You can apply the same basic idea to terrorist organizations. Now, you have to be clear about this, and the laws have to be clear. You have to make sure you're not, just saying, the people who go to this mosque must be a criminal organization because they're Muslims. That's crazy. And it's wrong. It's factually wrong. But you have to have good and clear standards. But if we know that there are organizations whose purposes are to carry out crimes of any sort, it's a criminal organization. You can go after the organization. You can disband the organization. You can arrest people who are members of the organization.
Hi. Do you believe there's a need for identity-based movements like feminism, Black civil rights, gay rights, or even the men's rights movement? Or do you believe that a more comprehensive equality movement is better? Because one of the main arguments of intersectionality is that certain marginalized groups need special focus if they're to achieve equality, and privileged groups are sort of suppressing that.
What do you mean by special focus?
Well, it's, for example, you might argue that for a rape, women have a higher rate of rape, so we need to take rape accusations seriously and devote more resources to female rape victims. Or black police brutality, for example.
Well, there's already laws on the books about rape and police brutality and pretty much anything you want to mention there. It's just enforcing the laws. Okay, so the Title IX thing is sort of saying, look, don't call the police, go to the dean or the dorm leader and report it there, tell your professor, no, call the police, okay, so, one of the things Heather McDonald, we've mentioned Heather McDonald many times, but why? Why is she controversial? She wrote a book called Blue Lives, was it Blue Lives Matter?
She wrote Blue Lives Matter and the War on Cops.
The War on Cops, right, so, her point, she was the first to identify the so-called Ferguson effect, because everyone has a camera, as we can see, and they videotape everything the cops do. The cops are now just, instead of active policing, where we know from demographic and AI programs that the police are now using, that the crime rate is higher at this corner right here, at Figueroa and 6th. There's a lot of gang activity there, so go park there, get out of your car, and talk to people. And so now that everyone's filming any kind of incident, the cops are going, well, I'm just not going to get out of the car. And therefore the gangs have more power, and so there's more. This is their basic argument as to why there's higher crime rates in some of these inner cities. And for that, she's criticized as saying that Black lives don't matter, only blue lives. I think part of this whole Black Lives Matter controversy could have been solved if they would have just add one word: Black Lives Matter 2. Then who would object to that? Of course, yes, absolutely. Instead, it sort of fuels this. Well, wait a minute. What about the blue lives, and all lives, and white lives, and again, it's that identity politics. Well, if your lives matter, what about mine? And then it divides people up. But the question here was, I think, actually getting at: are we looking for equal outcomes versus equal opportunities? It's like this whole Science March and is coming up, and there needs to be equal number of men and women in each of the professions. Okay, there's already more female PhDs in medicine, biology, psychology, and so forth. Do we need to have affirmative action for white males to catch up in the? No. We're only talking about physics and engineering. Okay, why are there not more women in physics and engineering? There's a lot of women who run these departments. Are you telling me behind closed doors they're secretly not hiring women? No. So what could it be? This is Heather McDonald's point. Maybe they just no. This is
Larry Summers.
Yeah. Well, no. I was thinking of the factual feminist. Christina Summers. Is that people just have different interests? Yes. So what? But if you insist that the astronomy club has 50% women, and if they don't, the guys running the club must be discriminatory and misogynistic. Believe me, these guys would love to have more women. All night. They're begging for women to go.
Yeah. They're just going to the wrong place. I would just add one thing to that. I'm pretty sure you would only want to be judged out of the thoughts that you have. I can see that you're Asian now. I don't know what that means about you politically, or if you're a believer or a not believer or anything. I would only judge you on what you would tell me about yourself and your actions. That's the way anyone should want to be judged, and we have to start with the individual and then go from there.
Well, yeah. I don't really buy into the whole intersectionality thing, but I think it's just interesting arguments for disproportionate levels of, I guess, difficulty. Because as you, Michael, sort of referred to, you're a white man, so therefore you have it easier in certain ways. Now, I'm not saying that it's universal, but I just think the argument of intersectionality is basically allocate resources.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's not that these ideas are completely wrong. Some people do have more power. So it's like, what do you do with those differences? I guess that's really what we're talking about. And also, this is the other thing that worries me. What do you personally do with the idea that you are inferior in this area, or you have less power in that area? What do you do about it? Do you go to the local parentis and go, help, somebody intervene? Or do you just say, well, fuck it, I'm going to do something else then? And so that's kind of, I worry about people, the oppression Olympics, absorbing that makes you weaker. Yeah. The world is hard enough as it is. It's very competitive. It's really hard. There's always somebody better than you. Really, I know, because I'm always getting dropped on bike rides, and there's people I meet in science, and there's always somebody smarter than me. It's just the way it is. taller guys make more money than I do, and they get, more dates, and so, whatever. I mean, these are trivial compared to other forms of, it's just the way it is. So, I know, it's easy for me to say buck up, and, but that's really, I worry about that.
I would say more than anything else, fight for what you believe in. If you think that everything that we just said up here is complete nonsense, then prove us wrong. That would be.
Can I just
Yeah.
add one or two, just a couple quick points? I think the fundamental issue, if you're thinking about it from a legal or a governmental standpoint, is equality before the law. I don't even think it's an equal opportunity. I think that's the wrong way to think about it from a legal standpoint. And if there is a time when there's a group that's not being treated equally before the law, yes, there definitely should be. I mean, I wouldn't call it an identity movement, but I mean, the classic example of this is the civil rights movement. I mean, that was an example of widespread oppression, basically, of black people that took two different forms: slavery in the in the mid 19th century, and then Jim Crow laws thereafter. And it took a whole century to solve. But that was a real issue that involved. I mean, it involved way more than just the law. It involved people getting involved and thinking this through. Michael mentioned the differences in attitudes today with respect to interracial marriage. That's the kind of issue, though, that has to, I mean, there's definitely a role for government that has to get rid of the anti-miscegenation laws. But from there, it's people educating each other and saying, look, this is a real mistake. Now, I think, though, so I'm against identity politics. It doesn't mean I don't think that there's any issue with respect to sort of discrimination, judging people by their skin color, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, my wife she's worked her ass off her entire life, educated herself, paid for her education, came from poverty. She now runs, she's the COO of a $25 million organization. And, she's had to work really hard and overcome all kinds of things like this. And I talked to her about this, and she'll tell me, look, I get treated differently because I'm a woman sometimes. And typically it's shut up and do the dishes, but no, I don't say shut up and do the dishes. No, it's actually what I say is thanks for working so hard and overcoming all of this stuff, because she makes more money than I do, so I'm a really lucky guy. But these are real issues, and people can pay more attention to these things. There's all kinds of things that people can think about. Be clear, just be more cognizant of how is it that people are treated if they're gay, if they're black, if they're a minority, if they're a woman, and just try to think hard about how can I actually make life better for these people if I'm interacting with them. That's a decent, sensible way to behave. My big problem is that when we involve government in this, it gets all screwed up for all kinds of reasons, but let me leave it at that.
Well, I just want to say thanks very much, you guys, for coming. Dave, I really love your show. I think you do a great job, so thanks so much for what you do. And Michael Spermer, I think you said you're a cyclist. I don't know if you've been here before, if you've cycled up Mount Lemmon. If you haven't, one of those.
I have, and I've done the Tour de Tucson
a bunch
of times back in the 80s.
So you know it. Okay, terrific. Well, I don't have a lot of disagreement about free speech, so I hope you don't mind. I was going to ask about a couple other things, not related to free speech, but about free exchange of ideas and skepticism. First was, I guess, a question for Michael. Dave had a guy on his show called Alex Epstein, who does a lot of talks about climate change. My question is, do you know him? Have you ever listened to him?
No, is this the meat guy or the
carbon? He wrote a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I obviously believe in scientific consensus and things like that. But when I listened to him, it was really interesting because I could not think of a counter-argument. And he actually doesn't deny climate change. He believes there's anthropomorphic human-induced climate, but he goes at it from an interesting view about cost-benefit analysis, looking at, what do we get out of fossil fuels versus what do we get out of renewables? So I guess my question, and I've looked at a few other videos, and I have not heard a coherent rebuttal to it, which is weird because it's very much against what everyone else says. So I guess, number one, my question is, you're a skeptical person, you've done a lot of stuff. If you would look into it, it would be really interesting to me to see what is another side to it. I guess you can't answer to it now because you haven't heard about it. And then number two, I think you said you're a good friend of Bill Nye. I would love to see if you could moderate a debate between those two. At least for me, it would be very interesting to actually hear if someone can actually kind of refute his ideas.
Well, let me just toss in one thing about Alex. First off, I got an insane amount of hate for doing that show. Insane. I mean, more than Milo, more than Cernovich.
Yeah, was there anything that was coherent that was a rebuttal?
Well, what's interesting, what I would credit him for more than anything else, and first off, the way you laid out what he said is actually correct. So it's very obvious to me that you've done some research and you've listened. because people were saying, hey, put a climate denier on, and blah, 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 and they were angry at me. Okay, fine. What he did after, immediately, he saw the criticism, and he then did a video. What did he took, what, like 100 questions?
2 hours, and he
YouTubers,
just went through it.
and just did it. That's the battle of ideas. Now, at the end, you still may not like what he said, but I got a great deal of credit for him and admiration for what he does. This guy believes something. Nobody's done it. Who's going to do that? Who's going to go? I don't know how many of you are going on YouTube comment section. It ain't pretty. Like he spent hours answering questions from anonymous people. That takes a certain something. But I'll let you take it.
Yeah, well, I just want to hear, because it's so unusual that I want to hear an argument against it. I just haven't heard it yet. And I just thought, Michael, this is your wheelhouse. If you're
It could be a
able
great
do
way for us
something
to
with
collaborate
this.
on something.
Yeah,
Him and Bill Nye would be
I'll
fantastic.
watch your show with him, and then I should read the book because we do a lot on climate stuff.
Yeah, you should read the book, but also, Dave's presentation is great, but also he has an interview with The Blaze, which can be a little weird, but it's a really great discussion about some of just it's a totally different way to think about it. Anyway, I just would like to hear if someone can refute it. Second question, I'll be quick, and this is something where you guys aren't going to disagree with me. I just wanted to ask you a question because you guys brought up Ben Shapiro before, and that guy is obviously very articulate and very smart. There's a lot of videos of him talking about abortion on YouTube and things, and I just cannot believe that no one asked him this one simple question. Because to me, there's a big hole in what he says. He believes that life begins at birth, right? And if he believes,
Not a birth.
sorry, I meant
That's it.
life begins at
I can beat him on that one.
Okay, so anyway, he believes that life begins at conception and that basically abortion is murder. But I guess the question then would be, Dave, if you talk to him, I'd love to hear you say this to him, but if he believes that, then he cannot logically and morally be against killing abortion doctors, right? I mean, those two would be inconsistent. Because I'm sure if some guy in 1942 in Germany killed Hitler, he'd be fine with that, right? Even though it's against German law, that guy was terrible, he was killing a lot of people. So the question is, why would he not support abortion? People killing abortion doctors, because that is inconsistent with his position.
It's a great question.
I mean, if you could ask, because I've never heard one person ask him that question, and I cannot understand why, because it seems like a really big hole.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, look, none of us can speak for him. It's a great question. He's agreed already with me to debate anyone that is willing to debate him on my show, with me as the moderator. We've tossed it out to a couple people, and actually people aren't responding, which tells you a little bit about...
abortion?
No, just in general.
Oh, in
He's agreed to
general.
debate people on my show, and I've offered it to a few people who haven't taken us up yet.
That'd be great, but I mean,
but
that's
I'll
specific,
keep that in
but
mind.
because a lot of other things he talks about with like late terms, I understand, I think abortion's a difficult subject. But if you truly believe that it begins at conception, you have to, it's inconsistent to not be against, to be against killing abortion doctors. Anyway, if you just ask that question, I would love to hear the answer to that.
We'll keep it in mind for sure.
Can I just say one quick
Yeah.
thing on this? So Alex Epstein used to work at ARI where I work now. And what he's doing, what's unique about what he's doing is he's taking human perspective on the issue. And he's putting in the context of, we have to think about this from a moral standpoint, which is what I think is triggering your, your view that this is a unique argument you haven't heard. And I don't want to make his argument. It's in his book. You should read his book. It's a terrific book, and he's a good guy. The one thing two things I'll say. Think about the value of free speech and the fact that this perspective that you've never heard of before is being brought to you only because we have freedom of speech, and he can get out there and he can actually make these arguments. And by the way, there are people who don't want to allow those who quote climate deniers to make any arguments, and he would definitely be couched in with those people, and that would you'd lose an entire perspective on this. The only other thing I'll say about it is I know Alex wants to debate Bill Nye, so if you're interested in trying to set something up, Michael, I can get in touch with Alex. You could easily, but I really love to.
Well, I mean, Bill's not a climate scientist. He's a good debater because he's pretty articulate and very funny, which helps. But really, there's people that know the science much better. I think would probably be more informative. I think of it just in terms of 5 questions: is the Earth getting warmer? Is it human caused? How much warmer is it going to get? What are the consequences, and what we should do about it? And on that sliding scale, from the science is really solid. It's pretty much pure science, and we're very confident too. It's very political about what we want to do, and it becomes a triage. So, the economic argument is, well, if you spend $1 trillion to lower the Earth's temperature by 1/2 a degree in the next 80 years by 2100, say. You could have spent the $1 trillion on mosquito nets, potable water, vitamins, food for people in Africa. What's the goal? If it's to save lives, we can spend money much quicker and less money and save more lives. What is the goal? And I think the environmental movement is sort of all over the map there and unfocused. And I don't know about Epstein, but Matt Ridley is also pretty sharp on this in terms of, we are a fossil fuel based economy, and it's not fair to other countries like China and India to say, no, you can't do it. We've just spent 200 years doing it, and now we're wealthy, and too bad. They're not going to follow that.
Matt Ridley is branded as a denier.
Yes, I know. So calling somebody a climate denier and they follow from the Holocaust. Okay, that's really shutting down dialogue, because you don't want to be called that, so you keep your mouth shut. Matt doesn't. He speaks up. So.
You should look at the videos, because he also says if you just look at climate deaths, they're down from 50 to like 90%. That's
Right.
So
Okay, I'm not sure about that, but all right.
All right, cool.
But I mean, I again, just sort of taking the positive view, I take what I call the Elon Musk model. Eventually we should get off fossil fuels. Electric is cool, and so let's do it. And there's other things like that. Once the synthetic meat technology gets there, the Google guys are pouring their money into this. I know it sounds gross, but at some point it'll be indistinguishable from animal meat, and then that'll save a lot of money and environmental impact from factory farming and all that stuff. So my answer is always more and better science and technology.
All right, I want to get to everybody, so we'll try to be a little quicker here. I know you guys probably want to smoke pot, or what do you do? There we go, we got the second pothead, okay.
So, I'm a great talker, as hopefully you guys come back very soon. So I just wanted to make one quick comment about the fossil fuels. Generally, from when I read in the literature, that seems to be pretty consistent, is that renewable energy such as solar and wind, they're getting better, especially solar as we get better technology, but still it's sort of like you have to weigh the cost. And for some people, it's, they're more interested in the money. You're like, okay, saving money, having really efficient energy, and then some people it's the environmental issue. So I think that's kind of where the debate lies in that stance. So I can obviously see some people, they don't want to spend all that money on solar, which is at this point about 50% less. So I looked at it, about 50% is efficient. And then, so a quick question. So, what is your stance on sort of the scientific literature? So like Nature, Science Jacks, like these journals that you have to pay to review. So obviously, there's the argument. Obviously, this money helps keep this like the literature keeps helps maintain it, make sure that the peer review goes well and everything.
Well, okay.
This is definitely for you.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I mean, you don't pay Science and Nature or Scientific American or whatever to be published. First of all, Scientific American pays you if they accept your article. Science and Nature, they don't pay and you don't pay them. The model is everyone's struggling in the print business. I publish a magazine, Skeptic. It's hard because people want free. That's the model we're all, including me. The moment I hit a paywall, I go right around it. I write the lead scientist. If I just find his email on his webpage. Often he posts his own article on his webpage, even though the journal is charging for it. And the ridiculous prices, like $39 for a book review that's 700 words long. Come on.
I think that's actually changing for there. Just real quick, if you guys knew that for $3 a month there was a YouTube alternative that was going to get rid of ads and let you put up, or even forget the ads, that was just going to be the same thing as YouTube with ads, but it was going to let the content creators put whatever they want. How many of you would do that? $3 a month.
Yeah.
I mean, so there is a generational thing here where younger people are willing because the economy is changing, which I think is as a print guy, it may not be that exciting.
Yeah, because, we're all struggling, so we give some away and so. The other part on government I think you were hinting at government subsidies for infant industries like solar. I'd be curious to know what you think about that. I mean, the argument, I mean, so Elon Musk, you know, I have a Tesla, but I got 10 grand from the government for buying a Tesla, you know. He's not a free market, complete free market guy. He gets government stuff. Could he survive without that? Could solar ever make it without government stuff?
I don't know, but if it couldn't, to buy solar was my view.
Okay.
I don't think it should exist. I don't think you should be taking money from some people and forcing them to subsidize anything that they don't choose to buy themselves.
What about the?
But have you seen his car? It's pretty
I-
sweet.
That said, Teslas are freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I think they're the coolest cars in the
I
world.
fell asleep in my car the other night in the fast.
But it drove you home.
I had it on autopilot. Well, it punishes you if you take your hand off the wheel. If you take your hand off the steering wheel more than 3 times, it disengages the
Oh,
auto
poor white
steering.
guy.
It was so good.
Oh, it's so
I'm impressed.
So I just had a quick question about, we seem like we're in a general consensus about where the public is going like, in terms of the left and the push against it, free speech and all that. But I was wondering what you guys' thoughts are of where the parties are going. Trump was kind of the pushback against it. For the Republicans, the Democrats seemed to go all in and paid for it, and the Libertarians didn't do well, as we know. So what do you guys think? Do you think the Republicans are going to change more into what we think more toward libertarian? Do you think libertarians will come up, or do you think someone else will? Yeah.
Yeah, well, first off, I voted for Gary Johnson, and I should be judged accordingly. He actually turned me against weed. He's the first person. There's a level. I mean, come on. I would say the parties, real quick, look, the Democrats are clearly, wait, where's the guy who asked the question? The Democrats are clearly going the regressive route. I mean, going the Bernie, Ellison, Perez route, they're clearly sticking with identity politics. I don't know if you saw the debate that they had when they were trying to pick their leader that eventually became Perez, and that woman got up there and she said, it's my job as a white person to sit back and tell other white people to shut. I mean, the whole thing's bananas. They're going that way for sure. It's a little harder to tell with the Republicans because there's Trumpism, which is a thing, and then there's actual Republicans or conservatives, and those are two very, very different things. So it's harder to see what's going on there. As for the libertarians, I would love if there was a viable libertarian party. I would put all my resources behind it, and I would probably back a legit candidate, and I hope that we can do it. Can the two-party stranglehold ever actually be broken? I don't know, but I don't know how much more evidence people need than Clinton versus Trump to realize something is rotten in this shithole.
Ditto. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you guys for coming, and I was recently reading an article that said that University of California, Berkeley has a class called The Toxicity of Whiteness, and I'm just wondering whether a public university has the right to teach a class that's so blatantly racist, and what can students do to stop that?
Yeah, I mean, the toxicity of Jewishness, you'd be run out of town. Yeah, it's problematic. I don't know who's running the show there. I mean, the department chair and the committees, they allow you to teach certain courses based on what they need. I mean, usually when you're hired to teach a certain set of courses. It's pretty straightforward in chemistry and biology. You know, these are the things that have to be covered because these are the pre-med students, and they got to have organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. There's no room for that. The social sciences, the humanities really especially, are so open-ended that these professors just make up courses, and I guess everyone's afraid to say anything. It's probably that silence, because they mostly agree with it. The administrators say, the deans and so on that approve those. You get certain funding. Each department gets funding, and within the department budget, you can pretty much have some flexibility there. I can assign whatever books I want for my class, for example. So no one checks and says, no, you can't do that. There's a lot of flexibility there, and I think that's what I'm saying, because they mostly agree with it.
Yeah. It would make an interesting Title IX claim, and third parties can file complaints, so maybe you should think about it.
There is a list of like the dumbest college classes every year. That is actually it could be an Onion piece. They're so funny. They're so stupidly funny.
I'd like to begin by thanking you guys for taking some time out of your busy schedules to come and talk with us tonight. But my question has to do with language and the left, how they obfuscate ideas by changing our language. For you, for example, you, Dave, you call yourself a liberal, and then you two might call yourself classical liberals. But isn't it interesting that the word liberal technically means, etymologically speaking, it means free. It comes from Latin for free, or freedom. And the left has turned the word liberal to mean what it does today, big government and everything. And I'm just wondering, another example would be hate speech. They're trying to turn hate speech into something now. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on combating the left's hijacking of our language?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've devoted the last 3 years of my life to it. It's not easy, but the only way you can do it is you have to expose their ideas. You have to, look, it is not, I'm not happy to say, but defending my liberal principles of freedom and live and let live is now a conservative position. That is not a position of the progressives. It's now a conservative thing. If I defend free speech these days, and I defend the rights of the individual, and all of those things, that's what conservatives do. It's not what progressives do. So you're right about the language, and again, it goes to labels, and you know, we get too caught up in the labels, and as Steve said earlier, the right-left thing doesn't really apply anymore. But I think the best way to defeat them is that it's partly why what I'm doing with my show is taken off. All I'm doing is talking about it, and people are so starved to hear something that is in some basis of truth that it's working. So I think the most important thing, which is what I've been telling everybody when we go to the schools, is that we need you guys to get in on this. I'm just one guy that got on YouTube. You can all get on YouTube and make something true, and the truth ultimately will beat their shitty ideas. It really will.
Thank you, Dave.
Hallelujah, brother.
All right, big finish.
Speaking of beating shitty ideas. So I'm a journalism major, and I am not particularly fond of like the way that like mainstream media covers things, like systematically distracting people from like what actually is important. And this whole like war against fake news, like what do you have towards like kind of combating that? Because the internet kind of does give everyone a platform to like clickbait and stuff like that. And also, like, what do you think about like systematic like withholding of information? Like if we all Googled the same thing, we'd all get different results and stuff like that. So does free speech in a way have like
Yeah,
the
you mean like the
freedom to-
algorithms that
Yeah.
they use, yeah.
Yeah.
And also feeding you news items based on your previous searches, so you know, the bubble, the echo chamber, whatever, is becoming ever tighter with social media, so that's good. Well, you're a journalism major, so you can combat that with better journalism. I mean, it's the whole free press. We've got to have it. The more the better. And so, I mean, you said something about, you know, distracting from the important ideas. Well, important to who? Who decides that? Well, we all do. So you write about what you think is important, and I'll write about what I think is important, and so on. We'll all do this. And then, you know, the consuming public. It's not perfect, you know, because again, we're going to be subject to the confirmation bias, in which we only read certain sources that we like and reinforce what we already believe. So you have to kind of force yourself to read something else. But just you're pursuing an important profession, I think, that, you know, we need to really fight for journalism, good journalism.
You know, I don't know how many of you guys saw the Woody Allen movie Midnight in Paris, which is basically the premise of the movie is that everyone thinks they live in very ordinary times, and if only I lived, you know, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, there was so much great stuff happening then. You guys actually are in college in an incredibly unique time. This was nothing. I'm 40. I'm not that much older than you. There was nothing like this back then. So for you guys, you are caught right now in between watching old school media, mainstream media just crumble. I mean, absolutely crumble. Nobody trusts CNN any more than they trust MSNBC or Fox. That monster is just crumbling, and it should crumble. It deserves to crumble. And then at the same time, there's a beautiful thing happening on the internet. But again, I just said you guys should all start YouTube channels, but anyone can do it. So any idiot can put on a jacket and a tie and sit there and name their show after a genocide and pretend they know what they're talking about. Call that. There you go. But really, so that puts the onus on you guys to figure out what's true, and so there's more work involved. And I know that sort of seems scary, and it's like, you know, how do you have to do that? It kind of sucks that you have to do it. But you can find some truth out there, but it's on you to get it.
I think we got one more question.
One more, all right.
All right, this is going to be the real strong finish here. But anyway, so what I want to be is an educator about science, and moreover, how people can take advantage of the information that's out there and use it for their own selfish, virtuous interest. So what would you recommend, David, like specifically about starting a YouTube channel and bringing it up, creating a culture, creating an audience?
That is a good finish. You go on YouTube, science, and individualism. Put something out there. Say what you believe. It's as simple as that. I'm one guy that happens to be saying what I believe and talking to people who I agree with and disagree with. Say what you believe, whatever you believe. And if you think that everything we set up here is complete nonsense, make a video about it. You know what? If any of you do that about something we said here tonight, I will gladly retweet you.
Yeah.
So that's it. Put your voice out there. And as I said before, don't give these guys an inch. Don't. I see this. I got into some shit on Twitter today, and it's like, I tweeted something to the effect of, I don't know exactly what happened with O'Reilly, but the idea of publicly destroying people is becoming dangerous. I believe that it wasn't a defense of O'Reilly in any way. I was on his show once. He was kind of a dick, but but I was getting a lot of shit for it. Okay, so be it. But the point is, put yourself out there, because just think about it this way: if you don't do it now, imagine what it's going to be like for your kids in 20 years. Like, we need more of you guys. It's as simple as that.
And to that point, I go into an event hosted by Adam Savage along with Michael Stevens from Vsauce, and I'd asked a similar question about how I can be a voice for science, and Adam Savage had told me not to mansplain.
Yeah, fuck that. Yeah, how about say what you think? Say what you think. I think fuck that's the right way to end this thing. Thank you guys. Thank you.